Our next guest, Mark Mix. Man, that name sounds easy to come out and roll off the tongue. Serves as president of both the National Right to Work Committee and the National Right to Work Legal Defense Foundation, two organizations at the forefront of defending employee freedom from the abuses of compulsory unionism. I think about the Janus case. Since taking the helm in 2003, Mark has overseen countless legal victories that have protected workers' rights across the country, often against powerful political and corporate forces. Under his leadership, the foundation has provided free legal aid to employees challenging forced dues, political spending without consent, and union practices that trample basic worker choice. Today, we're looking closely at a case out of Michigan involving workers at Rieth-Riley Construction. These employees are fighting for the right to vote out a union they no longer support. But their efforts have been tied up by procedural roadblocks at the National Labor Relations Board. Their legal brief is now before the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals. This isn't just about one company or one group of workers. It's about whether Michigan employees truly have a voice in deciding their workplace representation. And it comes as a pivotal point just months after Michigan repealed its right-to-work law, setting the stage for an even bigger battle over worker freedom in our state and across the country. Mark, welcome back to Detroit's Morning Answer.
John, it is good to be with you, and thank you. I don't need to say any more. You described everything very, very well right there. So thanks for that.
But see, I don't have your expertise and your finesse. So in the simplest terms, Mark, what exactly are the Rieth-Riley workers asking the court to do, and why has it taken so long to get there?
Yeah, John, unfortunately, this is not a one-off. This happens way too often across the country. And so these workers at Rieth-Riley, this is a company that's been around since 1916. This is a 100% employee-owned company. They have, the employees are involved in everything that's going on there. What they wanted, John, was simply a chance to vote, to have a secret ballot vote on whether or not the operating engineers local union 324, was going to continue the representation of the workers at that job for Rieth-Riley. And they had a majority of employees that signed up and said, we'd like to have this vote. We'd like to do it in secret. We'd like the votes counted, and we would let the votes determine whether or not the union is still the bargaining representative of the employees. And so they actually got the vote. They conducted the election. The ballots were cast. But right hours before the votes were counted, the National Labor Relations Board regional director stepped in and said, no, wait a minute. The union alleges an unfair labor practice charge from 2 years prior to the vote that has now blocked the counting of the votes. The votes have not been counted, and yet this litigation has gone on for now. We're almost in our sixth year regarding trying to get these employees to exercise their rights under the law.
Now, Mark, break down this National Labor Review Board's blocking charge policy, because I believe that is central to this dispute. Can you break down how that policy works and how it's been used to delay or stop workers from voting out a union?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first and foremost, the National Labor Relations Act that was passed in 1935, almost 100 years ago now, John, lays out the protocol for how this process is supposed to work. And obviously that protocol has been in precedence at the National Labor Relations Board, which is the 5-member board that adjudicates labor policy. They have set some precedents, that kind of thing. But here's the bottom line. The Act says you must conduct a hearing when the union alleges an unfair labor practice charge, and you shall conduct elections. Those are the rules. And, John, you've been in the legislature. You know the word shall means just what it says. You shall, right?
And I've been a cop, too. Not may.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, shall. That's a big word.
Shall and may.
Yeah.
Shall and may.
Yeah, shall and may. There you go. And so what happened here was the regional director, all of a sudden, right before the votes were counted, decided that he was going to go back to an unfair labor practice charge in 2018 and do what's called a merit dismissal, saying, we believe that what the union says is true, and therefore it's going to block the election and the counting of the votes. Yeah. There is no hearing. They didn't use the protocol that was laid out in the law. Yeah. And so that's really the contest. And not only that, but the NLRB, the board itself, had promulgated a rule saying that we would have an election, we would count the votes, and then we would actually, litigate the unfair labor practice charges to see if they're valid. Yeah. So they've not only violated the act, but they violated their own rules, and that's why we're in this fight with the employees from Rieth-Riley.
So here's my question. Compare and contrast the Janus versus AFSCME decision with this Rieth-Riley. Can Rieth-Riley case? Is there anything in the Janus decision that could help what Rieth-Riley is fighting?
Well, John, first of all, thank you for raising Janus. That was a case that we argued on behalf of a individual employee from the state of Illinois at the U.S. Supreme Court and won in 2018 that says that government workers, and this is the operative word, John, that government employees, no matter what level, no matter what type of government employee you are, cannot be compelled to pay union dues or fees in order to work for government. So that is a constitutional First Amendment protection for every government worker in America when it comes to forced dues or fees as a condition of working. For the private sector, it's a different story. The private sector power of union officials to force workers to pay dues is part of a statutory framework from that National Labor Relations Act from 1935. So we have a distinction between public sector employees and private sector employees. We got the public sector piece. That's the Janus decision you mentioned. We got that, but we're still working on the private sector piece. And you know, Michigan had a right to work law for a decade. Despite what union officials said that the sun wouldn't come up and the roads would collapse, although you got to still fix those damn roads apparently. But you know, the bad things they said were going to happen didn't happen. In fact, manufacturing growth increased during the decade when right to work was there. All the things that unions said would happen if we allowed workers to choose whether or not they wanted to be forced to pay dues or fees to a union never came about, except for the fact that once the Democrats took control in Lansing by one vote in both chambers, the first thing on the agenda was give union officials the power to force workers to pay dues to the union in order to work.
Well, I'll tell you one thing. Speaker Matt Hall is moving to push that. The problem is the Senate, the Democrats in the Senate. That's where the holdup is as far as fixing those roads, because I'm with you. Fix the damn roads. I believe that, too. Now, if the Sixth Court sides with workers, could this case be a springboard for challenging similar NLRB policies in other regions of the country?
Absolutely. We think that if we can get a good decision here, and probably, John, what's going to happen is the union's going to appeal it up to the U.S. Supreme Court. But if we can get a good ruling in the Sixth Circuit, obviously it has an impact in the Sixth Circuit. But because of the rulings and because the nature of this problem as it spans across the entire country, a precedent like this would be very helpful. And it would go back to simply saying, one, enforce the law that says shall have hearings, shall have elections, and then the NLRB rule itself that says we shall have elections, we shall count the votes, and then we'll determine whether or not these unfair labor practice allegations are true or not. Because the first thing that union officials usually do when workers want to get out of a union is they'll say, oh my gosh, the employer put them up to this. And sometimes that may be true, but that's a violation of the law as well. And that will stymie an election. But what we're saying here is these employees, a majority of employees, said, let's just have a vote, and the NLRB is denying them that. If we can get a precedent where we can win in the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals, that would be major and would have an impact across the rest of the country. I'm sure of that.
If you're just joining the show, we're talking to Mark Mix. He serves as president of both the National Right to Work Committee and the National Right to Work Legal Defense Foundation. Mark, for workers in Michigan who may now be more hesitant to speak up against their union, what practical steps can they take to protect their rights?
Yeah, well, they can do exactly what the employees here at Rieth-Riley had done, and they can file a decertification election that would allow them to have this vote as to whether or not the union should maintain themselves in the workplace. And they can call the National Right to Work Legal Defense Foundation, and they can get free legal aid in their efforts to exercise their rights under the law. And that's really an important part of all of this. And we have 19 staff attorneys who do nothing but help employees exercise their rights. And that has led to 18 case arguments in front of the United States Supreme Court and literally thousands and thousands and thousands of cases across the country. Right now, in fact, John, we have over 260 active cases on behalf of employees across America.
You know, critics of right to work claim it's a political tool to weaken unions. Now, I know there are some private and government unions that listen to this show. I know because I've talked to them. How do you counter that argument, especially when talking to blue-collar workers here in Michigan?
Yeah, John, unfortunately, the rhetoric of union officials about right to work and what it means is very, very distorted for obvious reasons. Their primary business model is collecting union dues, and so they wanted the ability to force everyone to pay. What I would say is this. The law is written to protect employee rights, not union officials' rights and not corporate rights when it comes to union decisions. And so basically by following the law that says, hey, let's get the vote, let's let the workers speak, that's an important part of all this. I mean, there's nothing in Michigan law or in federal law that stops anyone from joining a union or asking a union to represent them. There may be opposition from employers in this case, but employees have these rights. And the exercise of those rights, whether to get in or get out, should be enforced. And they should be equal in the sense of, hey, we've had an experience with this union for the last 3 years or 5 years or 20 years, because we know that only about less than 10% of any union member in the country today has ever voted on whether or not they wanted to be in the union because their legacy, like in Michigan, the United Auto Workers won their first election in 1937, and there's never been a vote on whether or not the people that are working there today want to stay in the United Auto Workers Union. But they can have that power if they understand how the law is written to protect their rights in the workplace. Now, again, a worker. Yeah, go ahead.
Now, what happens though? Do they lose union protections if they? Is that one of the biggest arguments that one of the reasons why they're not fighting it is because they don't want to lose the protections that the union offers?
Well, that's right, John. And if the union does a great job for the employees, there's never going to be a problem. It's when the union speaks out politically. And you mentioned this in the introduction. I mean, this idea of forced political conformity that is part and parcel of the union's activities. They spend literally billions of dollars on politics that we know most. In fact, in this last election, the majority of private sector employees in union households voted for Donald Trump, even though the union officials, the United Auto Workers Union, like Sean Fain, who called Trump the biggest con man in the world and says Trump is a scab, they spent 99.49% of all their money on the Kamala Harris campaign, basically in opposition to what the rank and file workers they claim to represent wanted politically and policy-wise.
Yeah, I remember when I was in the House when Mark brought that case against AFSCME, and I caught a lot of grief because one of the things that I said, I never took any public sector union money because I knew that I was going to have to vote on the pension bill that was before us. And I remember meeting with Mark, and man, I took a lot of heat because I was a former police officer and part of a union. They felt like I should have, stood in solidarity. My thing was, I believe in freedom and liberty and independence. And I'm going to do what's right for the people, not so much what's right for me. That was the mindset I took as a legislator. We need more legislators that take that mindset, correct?
Amen, brother. Amen. Preach it. And, your last segment, when you talked about the difference between democracy and a republic, I mean, this really gets to that very point, that if I can get one more vote than you, John, then I can force you to do something that's against your individual freedom, individual rights, and your individual philosophy. That's wrong. And there is a place for democracy, but not when it comes to individual rights.
Correct. I 1,000% agree with that. I definitely do, because not all countries can be America. I really believe that.
Yeah, indeed.
But Mark Mix, what resources does the National Right to Work Legal Defense Foundation offer for workers who think they're being denied their rights?
Yes. Well, first of all, we can answer questions. We have a toll-free number, 800-336-3600, where an individual who has questions about their workplace rights as it relates to union representation or even getting a union in, they can talk to an attorney for free about what their rights are under the law. Secondly, if the case has a precedent-setting value, or if we can protect the individual by exercising things we've already won and helping them navigate this kind of, this dinosaur-like labor policy from the 1930s, we're willing to do that. And we've been doing that since 1968 and doing it, helping employees across the nation for free, exercising their rights and understanding their rights in the workplace. So that phone call can help. We are on the amazing internet at nrtw.org. There's lots of answers to questions that people ask often. There's videos that explain your rights in the workplace, how you go about this process of asking questions of union officials. It's all there on the National Right to Work Foundation's website.
Hey, Mark, you know what I'm going to try to do? I'm going to try to get a union rep on with you one day, and let's duke it out and have a hard-hitting back and forth. I would love to do that. You game for that?
I'm John. Anytime, anywhere. I have ideals, and we'll travel. No question about it.
In one or two sentences, why should every Michigan worker care about the Rieth-Riley case?
Well, because it will establish a precedent that will protect their rights under the law, and those rights, as we mentioned, are shall have an election, shall have a hearing. They shall be heard when they have questions about whether or not the union continues to represent them. And if workers in Michigan and across the country understand that and will actually have the courage to stand up and fight, we can make a difference so that employees are more empowered when it comes to questions about their workplace rights and their workplace representation.
I may have to reach out to you because I would love to talk to somebody from Rieth-Riley and have a conversation with them. And I mean, not on the air first, but just to have a conversation with them and see where they're at and let them know that we support them.
Yeah, John, we'll help to facilitate that. I think one of our lawyers still representing them can probably set that up. But let's talk about that, because I think what you'll find is they'll say, look, the union's not doing anything for us except for, collecting the dues and then playing politics with their money as well. And that's really one of the primary objections of workers across the country is, how can you take my money and that I have to pay you as a condition of keeping my job and use it to support ideas and candidates that I oppose? That's just wrong.
Mark, we got to leave it there. He's Mark Mix. He serves as president of both the National Right to Work Committee and the National Right to Work Legal Defense Foundation. What's the website again, sir, and the number?
That's nrtw.org on the website, nrtw.org, and 1-800-336-3600 on the toll-free number.
All right, Mark Mix, you are a class act. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks, John. Appreciate it.
No problem. Detroit's Morning Answer.